Hi, I'm Sandra Ton, and I facilitate the Memoir Writing for Seniors program at the Powell River Public Library. Each year, we publish an anthology, a collection of memoirs written by some of the many participants of the Memoir Writing for Seniors program. The theme for the 2020 book, which was just published in late December, was Treasures. So the book title is Treasures, a Memoir Anthology. And treasure, as defined by the dictionary, is wealth or riches stored or accumulated, or anything a person greatly valued or highly prized. So this book, this ebook, electronic book, is a book of 26 treasures, and you can download it for free from the library website, and if you look below the video, you will find the links there. You can download it and read it on the computer. You can download it version for your Kobo or for your Kindle. So normally we launch our annual book with an in-person event, cramming up to about 60 people into the First Credit Union community event space at the library. But in lieu of that, for this time, I've taped 7 of the 26 authors reading their story for this video launch. So the book really offers a diverse range of treasure-themed topics. Treasured people, including a wartime saint, a brother and 2 mothers, 30 precisely experienced minutes in nature as a treasure, a couple of gold mine stories, a magic room, valuable rings, 1 egg timer, 2 enchanted mice, a healing harp, and even an actual buried treasure, and so many more treasures. For me, personally, the most valuable treasure in this book was the absolutely wonderful experience of working with so many creative and inspiring writers. I truly treasure each one of them, as well as their many peers who participated in the making of this book through their feedback and attendance at our ongoing monthly memoir group meetings. So let's hear a few of these treasured stories from the authors themselves. The first story, author reading, is of a story that happened here in Powell River and is by longtime memoir writer Kathy Bennett. Her story is titled Dump Finds.
When I was a kid, people didn't know about recycling. Taking one's trash for a ride in the country was a regular activity. People would drive out of town in search of a spot in the bush where they could leave their unwanted stuff. Other people would see this spot and throw their unwanted stuff on top. In no time at all, there would be a magnificent pile of interesting items: tires, glass jars, bed frames, windows, you name it, it would be there. Even derelict cars. Since the road we lived on was in the country, it had its share of assorted dumps. One of these dumps was just a 5-minute walk from our house. Our family loved to poke around in it to see if we could find anything of use. We'd clamber all over that pile with its broken glass and tin cans, sometimes starting small avalanches in our search. We'd browse this local dump on a regular basis, as one never knew when a fresh load of garbage would arrive. Every now and then, my sister Teresa and her friend Barbara Markland would decorate the tree stumps alongside the road with the garbage they found. Hubcaps, headlights, and mattress springs provided great material with which to transform the woodland stumps into fantasy creatures. Sometimes our family would go for a Sunday drive to visit the big dump, which was on the highway opposite the Three Stooges garage. I have no idea why the garage was called by that name, but locals knew which dump you were referring to when you said the dump opposite the Three Stooges. What fun we had scampering all over that great mountain of goodies that overlooked the ocean. Other people would be there too, carrying away whatever treasures they found: a metal bucket, a door frame, a fridge drawer, a set of bicycle wheels. Mom told us that where she came from in Saskatchewan, dumps were called the nuisance grounds. I couldn't understand why you'd call a place a nuisance when it was chock full of valuable things. It wasn't like we had thrift stores, garage sales, or swap and shop. Why, we didn't even have that many stores. Most of what we owned came from the Simpson, Sears, or Eaton's catalogs. Besides, money was an issue in our family, what with Mom and Dad having lived through the Depression. They both had this unbelievable need to save every penny. But at the dump, everything was free. It was there for the taking. The funny thing is, I don't recall anything much ever being brought home, although there was that one day when Auntie Jean, a family friend, and her daughter Shirley, who was my age, came for tea. While our mothers visited, Shirley and I decided to check out the nearby dump. To our great amazement, we found dozens and dozens of stuffies. It was fantastic, especially since no one we ever knew owned more than one or two stuffies, including us. Our eyes were immediately drawn at the very same instant to a small stuffed rabbit, a soft gray rabbit with floppy ears. We both pounced on it. "It's mine," I shouted. "No," Shelley yelled back. "I saw it first." After a brief tug of war with the rabbit, I, in a sudden burst of inspiration, as though the dump was my personal property, magnanimously offered Shelley all the other stuffies, providing, of course, that she relinquished the rabbit to me. But no, she wanted the rabbit, so I snatched it from her and ran home. Shelley ran after me in hot pursuit, hollering long and loud. We burst into the house yelling and screaming. After hearing our story, Auntie Jean insisted that Shelley give the rabbit to me. I gloated as I clutched my newfound prize, but my gloat was short-lived as Auntie Jean abruptly up and left, hauling Shelley with her. As Mom cleared away the teacups, she muttered and tutted. I caught the odd word like fuss bucket and cleanliness. I felt bad that Auntie Jean didn't share in our excitement. I suddenly had this urge to give Shelley the rabbit, but I never did. I knew Auntie Jean would just throw it out. When I think back on those days, it truly is a wonder that no one gave any thought to contamination, germs, or getting tetanus shots, not to mention the environment.
That was Dump Finds by Kathy Bennett. Kathy says she enjoys writing her memoirs, which she will one day pass along to her grandchildren. She still enjoys poking around in dumps. However, now she looks for garden shrubs and perennials to take home instead of stuffies. So the Memoir Writing for Seniors program is in its 12th year now, and hundreds of seniors from Powell River have taken the 8-week course. Many of them have opted to commit to one of the 7 memoir writing groups that meet on a monthly basis to support their ongoing writing. Our next author, Shirley Caulfield, graduated from the most recent 8-week course. She was born and raised in Nova Scotia until the age of 17 and has lived in beautiful BC since 1964 and in Powell River since 1995. She is writing her memoirs for her family, including her 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. When Shirley first came to the memoir writing course, she was full of some nervousness and doubts about the ability to write, but she's one of those born natural storytellers, and her writing is quite wonderful, and now she's just flying along. So she'll have a lot of great stories to give to her family. So here is Shirley Caulfield's reading her Treasures memoir, and it's titled Down East Sound of Music.
Down East Sound of Music. As a young girl, I sang every single day. Oh, how I sang. My friends and I all carried our songbooks everywhere we went, just in case someone broke out in song. We didn't have computers or typewriters in those days, so we handwrote all the songs in pen or pencil. In the evenings, my sister and I would sing while doing the dishes. I would wash and she would dry. We would harmonize, perfecting and preparing for the Saturday matinee performance at the movie theater, which took place before the movie started. When the time came, I would be too shy to sing. Just the two of us in front of all those people, with them looking at us? She carried on and did it on her own like a born star, which I thought she was going to be one day. No doubt about it. I would stand there letting out the odd giggle and let her do our whole number. She carried it off and got all the applause. Many a summer evening after the dinner dishes were put away, my family would sit out on the fire escape, and before long, we had a real down east sing-song going on. My mother, with her Irish background, seemed to be the best singer of all. To everyone's joy, including her own, she relished in singing her solos and would put on quite the performance. All the fire escapes in our neighborhood faced toward the middle of a big grassy square, which was surrounded by about 10 or 12 wooden buildings. The housing units that did not have fire escapes would have an area where people would bring anything that resembled a chair or a blanket so they could sit on the grass. The seating arrangements were second to none, or so we thought. Out would come guitars, microphones, spoons, gut buckets, washboards, and anything else that would make the sound of music. The whole neighborhood was there, both adults and children. Everyone was welcome, no one was left out. Sometimes on quiet days, my friend Annette and I would sit on the front stoop and have our own private concert, but anyone who wanted could participate. Often we would start out with just the two of us, with our handmade songbooks in hand, and someone would come along and join us. And quite often we would end up with 6 or 7 of us, crunched together on only 2 steps, laughing and harmonizing as we shared the 2 songbooks. We were a very talented young group, let me tell you, with lots of fun, laughter, and imagination. Even the odd harmonica or paper-covered comb appeared from nowhere to add to the music. A couple of our favorite songs were Who Threw the Overhauls in Mrs. Murphy's Chowder and We Belong to Glasgow. When we knew ahead of time that there was going to be more than 8 of us getting together, we would walk to one of the schools and sit on the front steps, or go to one of the more remote areas in the schoolyard if we didn't want an audience. That way, we could practice our repertoire and dance numbers to the tunes so we could put on a neighborhood concert someday. Sometimes I was invited to spend weekends with Annette and her family at their cabin on McNabb's Island in the middle of the Halifax Harbor. The cabin had no electricity. They used oil lamps and a wood-burning kitchen stove, but they had an old phonograph that we could manually wind up so we could play records. We would spend hours at that old-fashioned machine and listen and dance to records as they played with that funny hissing sound. We loved letting the machine slow down to almost a stop before winding it up again. Of course, the needle would be totally worn out, but we always had singing, and looking back, I feel I was blessed in this way.
It's not only women who take the Memoir Writing for Seniors course and become part of the program. Men also take the course, including Dave Harper. Dave's wife Gail took the course first, and then when he attended one of our live events to hear Gail read, I challenged him to take the course, and he did. And I'm so glad he did, because he has so many interesting stories. This one that he submitted for the Treasures book took place in Powell River, where Dave has lived since the age of 3. He grew up to be an electrician at the local paper mill. He spent 40 years in the real estate business, and has been involved in several community organizations, and he's currently the director of the Powell River Hospital Foundation. Here is Dave reading his Treasures memoir, which is titled Precious.
I don't think I was a really bad boy, but on occasion I did cause my mother some grief. One such time was when my uncle, aunt, and cousin Jack came to visit us at our Poplar Avenue home near Powell Lake. Jack wanted to see my haunts. My mom's parting words were, "Stay away from the lake." She was fearful of the lake, which was revered for its depth and swift currents, and was the place where a neighborhood boy had tragically drowned. As we walked near City Motors, Jack asked if we could sneak a peek of the lake. The garage had a pit behind it where used motor oil was dumped. There was a plank over it, and one could get a view of the lake from the pit. After we mounted the springy plank, I lost my footing and tumbled into the sludge. Our trip home was quiet, and we were not well accepted on arrival. Mom knew how close the garage was to the lake. As a result, my cleaning was a little more robust than necessary. Mr. and Mrs. Biles lived 2 doors from us. They had no children, so with their encouragement, I would visit them. I watched Mrs. Biles gardening and Mr. Biles while he chopped the heads off his meat birds. I was amazed how long chickens could run around the yard with no head. Next would come tea time and treats. Since my school friend Doug had told me he was adopted, I wondered if I was adopted. I told the Biles I thought I was adopted. One day when my mother and I both visited them for tea, Mrs. Biles said, "Nora, I didn't know David was adopted." My mother nearly choked on her tea. I then found I was not adopted. There was no more cookies for me that day. The Middletons and their kids, Murray and Heather, who lived near us, moved up to Chilco Street in Wildwood. Shortly after, 3 of my mates and I decided to visit them. As I was about ready to leave for the trek, my mother's parting words were, "Do not get your new pants dirty and do not be late for dinner." The gang of us arrived and had a good visit with our friends. After a while, Murray suggested we go down the hill to climb the favorite challenge, Arpidinkus. The huge rock could only be mounted via a tall fir tree nearby. The feat was accomplished with a group effort. The individual who got the shortest stick scaled the fir with a long rope in hand. The rope was tied to the top of the tree. The free end was thrown over the top of the rock. All but one would pull back on the rope, and the tree would lie over the rock. This allowed access to the sought-after viewpoint. When it was my time to climb the fir, I clambered amongst the branches on my way to the top. I was about to step off the tree when my trusted gang lost their purchase on the rope. The tree sprang like a whip. I catapulted through the air like a bullet-riddled duck. Amazingly, I landed in one piece. My new pants, however, were torn from crotch to cuff. The walk home was somewhat somber. The fact my pants were clean and that I was not late for dinner did not get me any brownie points with my mother. One Friday evening, my scout pack observed a mother and son potluck dinner at the United Church Hall in the town site. Mothers and sons were alternated around long tables. The main course was well enjoyed. My close friend, Tom Lewis, was sitting with his mother, Nan, across from Mom and me. As we were waiting for dessert, some idle chatting took place. My mom, who was looking across the table at Tom, asked, "Tom, whatever happened to your 2 top teeth?" It was when Tom's mother, Nan, said, "Nora, had you not heard that my rectal muscles twanged and I left the table in haste?" While my mother composed herself. She was not, it turned out, impressed by my ability with a tennis racket and a rock. I didn't enjoy dessert or the walk home. My mother was supportive throughout the years and always encouraged me to meet challenges. We were very close, despite the occasional bouts of grief I caused her. In 1987, I visited my mother in the Nanaimo Hospital for 2 days before I was required back in Powell River for business. When I was ready to leave Mom for the ferry, She pulled me close to her to speak some parting words, as was the tradition. She said, "I love you, David." We kissed, I said goodbye, and headed for the ferry. My intent was to go home, take care of business, return to Nanaimo in 2 days with my spouse, Gail. The next day, however, my sister called. My precious gem of a mother had passed away. Her final parting words will stay with me forever.
So Dave was also a graduate from the most recent Memoir Writing for Seniors course, and he also is continuing in one of the monthly groups to support his ongoing work of writing his memoirs. The next story is by Diana Wood, who is also a graduate from the most recent course. Diana was a bit hesitant and shy about writing and sharing stories in English, which is her second language. But as you'll hear in a moment, she's doing an amazing job, and she has amazing stories to tell. Diana is a Chinese Canadian who was born in China and has lived in Powell River for 50 years. She is writing her memoirs to tell of her adventures while growing up in Taiwan. This is My Own Excavation by Diana Wood.
In the summer of 1965, I joined a group of archaeologists to excavate at Taiyuan, a little valley on a remote countryside, located on the east coast of Taiwan. The entrance to the valley was through a tunnel with a fast-flowing river running beside it. A handful of farmers and retired soldiers made their living from growing rice, bananas, pineapples, and papayas. Our team consisted of Richard Pearson, postdoc from Yale University, who was our leader, and his assistant, Johnny Kress, a graduate student and the one who had invited me. The rest of the team, 2 men and 1 woman, were from the National Taiwan University, where I was a student in the Department of Horticulture. I was very excited to be included in this excavation adventure, but blew it on the first day. As I held a pickaxe in the air, hit my target below, I heard, "Stop! You can't dig like a farmer." Johnny, after seeing my red, embarrassed face, draw the 3 stone figures. "You are artistic. Would you like to help out?" I knew he was trying to help me save face in front of others. And I was glad I didn't have to spend hours just to scrape a few inches of soil with a little trowel and brush. To show my appreciation, I washed broken potteries in the river with him every evening. Sometimes we washed under the moonlight. And when we were finished with the work, we would swim and bathe in the cool running river. It was the most romantic 2 weeks of our relationship. Every morning, our group walked by the field on one of the terraces, and I saw stone tools lying on the surface. They had been exposed by farmers plowing, but the archaeologists explained they were not interested in them because the site had been ruined. We also passed by stone-built houses and roofs formed by splitting timber bamboo overlapping like tiles. Beside the houses were bananas and papaya trees. July 2nd was my birthday, and Johnny made a banana flambe to substitute for a cake. The bananas were provided by a farmer. The high content of alcohol in sorghum liquor was poured on. And with the strike of a match, the flame was glowing and lit up the entire inn. Everyone sang "Happy Birthday" in Chinese, and I could not stop smiling. It was the most memorable birthday celebration I had ever had. We ate the dessert before we ate the main meal of rice, vegetables, and fish prepared by the innkeeper. Outside, the whole valley was dark. There was no electricity at this corner of the world. One afternoon, while we were walking back from work, all of a sudden, dark clouds rolled in, and almost immediately, a torrential summer rain beat down on us. Everyone started to run. Ahead of us on the trail, a farmer stood in his doorway and signaled us to enter. And we ran inside. The heat from our wet bodies soon filled the room with steam, and I found it difficult to breathe. So I quickly walked outside and squatted under the eave. I was relieved to breathe in cold air and listen to the rain hitting the roof. I was lured into daydreaming and was transported back to 1949, when communists took over the government in mainland China, and our family ran to Taiwan. Later, we settled down in Guangfu East Village in Taipei, where my father worked. The first time we encountered a typhoon, which brought torrential rain and howling wind. Exciting for the children, but worrying for our parents. We all sat inside and listened to the heavy rain hitting our tiled roof. When the rain and the wind finally stopped, we all went outside. And when my parents were examining the blown down bamboo fences, I found a stick and made canals to join all the puddles on the ground. Watching water from one puddle flow to the others. As I squatted outside the farmer's house, remembering that younger time, I picked up a sharp stone and started to lazily scratch the rain-soaked ground in front of me without much conscious intention. After a few minutes, I hit upon something hard, and from the earth, I fished out a piece of translucent greenish stone. My very own excavation. I was so happy, and though perhaps it was something valuable. When I present the stone to the team, they stopped talking, and with looks of wonder on their faces, asked, "Where did you find this?" They told me it looked like a piece of jade bracelet. By this time, the rain had completely stopped, and we walked silently back towards the inn. Each team member forming a theory as to how valuable the bracelet might be and whether it was related to their dig. They decided not to excavate under the farmer's house, since he had so kindly offered them shelter and tea. Many years later, when I went back to visit my university, I was told that the bracelet, which was still in the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology, belonged to the Bennett culture of the East Coast and was from the late Neolithic period of about 3,000 years ago.
The next author reading is George Samuel, who has been in the memoir writing for seniors program for many years. George says that the writing of memoirs helps him with his healing. He often writes of the childhood years he spent growing up in places such as Burma and Scotland, but this story is one from his Canadian childhood experience. Here is George Samuel reading Private Profits.
It was terribly important to me to be a paperboy so I could have my own source of income with nobody to dictate how I spent it, and so I could have my secrets and private life. I felt proud and independent. I bought cigarettes, my most treasured secret, and 78 RPM records, and tickets to the movies, and now and then an item of stylish clothing. I never checked with my parents how they felt about my smoking. Just took my friend's word for it that it would be very painful trouble if my parents found out. I also put money regularly into my savings account and ended up with $1,000, which supported my first wife and me when I was 20 during our first year of marriage. I had 2 memorable interviews with the circulation manager of the Edmonton Journal, a man named Campbell. He'd expected me to be a little Jewish boy because of my surname, and was surprised to see that I was tall and blonde and 14. By the time I was 18, I understood that he found me far too mature for the job of paperboy. I was the oldest paperboy. "What are you still doing here?" he said. I think he was grumbling because of the rule that a paperboy could not have his pay reduced. Only when a route changed hands could the journal reduce its rate of pay. A city route earned less per customer than a bush route, but I was still getting paid at the bush route rate, even though my route had become developed and thickly populated. I was pleased to be beating the system in this way and irritating Campbell, the circulation manager. Before becoming an Edmonton Journal paperboy, I was a paperboy's helper, and then had my own route with the Edmonton Bulletin. From this, I was fired because I defied an order from one of the bosses to go to the end of the line during cashing in, which was to be my punishment for skylarking or messing about. My father was upset with me for getting fired. He felt, perhaps rightly, that this predicted a life of less than success in the working world. I wasn't ashamed or embarrassed at being fired, but irked by the inconvenience of losing income. The journal proved luckier for me than the bulletin. I enjoyed the work of being a paperboy, the trudge of it, the rhythm, the privacy, the opportunity to sing to myself. At first, I used my bicycle to carry the papers, but when it was icy, I couldn't keep it balanced. So after that, I always walked. I enjoyed the paper shack, where the paperboys would gather to receive their loads of papers to deliver. We smoked cigarettes and made jokes in the summer sun or by the winter stove, fired by, of course, paperboy, sometimes until red hot. Our first manager in the paper shack was Shirley, a tiny man at 50th years. He didn't seem to mind being treated like one of the boys. He was replaced by Ivar, an immigrant from Latvia. Very serious but pleasant. Shortly, we could continue to see it cashing in. This gave me a pleasant feeling of continuity and normality. It was good to tease Ivar, who I assumed was our own age and was indeed in our class at school. It's only in recent years that I began to realize he was a decade older than his classmates. He had such a habit of calling us you boys, and though he would laugh at our antics of trying to get us to be serious like him, he told us we must call the paper shack the journal office, and that we were not paper boys but journal carriers. Of course, we paid no attention to this nonsense.
Our next reader, Barry Wood, was born and raised in a small village in Ontario's cottage country. Each month, when he attends our monthly memoir meeting, he brings us, the rest of his group, into another world, one of canoes and bike riding and lake fishing and large family gatherings and traditions, all on the rugged and beautiful Canadian Shield. Barry is writing about his pioneer family history and his childhood memories for his family. This story that he submitted for the Treasures ebook project is titled Dust to Dust.
Our village cemetery lies on a gentle green slope, reaching down to a small stream which flows over Bridalveil Falls into Shadow River. A ridge of granite rises among the stones, part of the bedrock that underlies the shallow soils which embrace the graves. The main road connecting the village to the outside world runs by the cemetery. Driving by at night, headlights reflect off the polished tombstones like fairy lights calling, "Remember me, remember me." As a child, I didn't remember the departed. In our young lives, there were 4 classes of people: kids, adults, old people, and that shadowy group, the dead. I didn't really think of the transition between these groups, particularly from the living to the dead. I did have a vague sense that our parents felt differently. Both my parents' families have deep roots in our village and the surrounding area. Each summer, aunts, uncles, and cousins would return to enjoy the warm, sunny weather and the clear lake water. But they also came to reconnect with family, the living and the dead. I enjoyed time with my cousins, rambling on the rocky ridges, boating, swimming, and of course, fishing. Part of the summer ritual was visiting family heritage sites. The place most often visited was the village cemetery, where 4 generations of our family are buried. When I went there as a child, I had no memory of any of my ancestors. I was more interested in playing with my cousins among the old stones while our parents talked quietly and knelt together to tend the grave sites. But one thing we all shared was a visit to Bridalveil Falls. A short walk through a silent cedar grove and we reached the falls, where the quiet stream rushed over a granite ledge to a pool below, creating the misty veil which gave it its name. I know for the children it was the excitement of exploring the slippery rocks and the enticing pool that attracted us. But now I believe it was the flowing living waters which refreshed our parents after a somber visit with the dead. My childhood isolation from the reality of death came to a shattering end when I was 13. My aunt died suddenly in her early 40s, leaving a heartbroken husband and 3 young children. I was thrust into the world of death rituals, the funeral home with the viewing and the visitation, the funeral service and the heart-rending graveside lowering of the casket into the ground. I shared firsthand the raw grief that death can bring, and my relationship with our village cemetery changed. One of my summer jobs as a teenager was cutting the grass at the cemetery. In the evening after my day job pumping gas, I'd drive there in the old red truck. I'd fire up the power mower and push it among the gravestones as the evening sun slowly set. Initially, I was a bit uneasy mowing over all the graves because as a child we were taught it was disrespectful to walk directly on a grave. The roar of the mower seemed intrusive in this peaceful place, but it created a cocoon of noise in which my mind was free to think of all those resting a few feet below me. It wasn't a frightening thought, but it was sobering. I now knew that under each of these stones lay someone with their own history of love and loss. When I finally shot off the mower, I'd walk to our family plot. There I'd stand, surrounded by the sweet even song of birds and the rich aroma of mown grass, remembering their stories and wishing them a peaceful night. As time ticked by, there have been more deaths, too many. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, my father, who outlived his old red truck by only a few years, and more recently, cousins and friends. Last year, my 100-year-old mother died. Her funeral was a joyous celebration of life long life well lived. Our grandchildren attended the service and the interment. Funerals today are in general a gentler affair, with cremations being the norm. However, two of our young grandsons seem to have a real sense of meaning. The day after the funeral, we visited the old log church built by my ancestors, where my mother had attended as a child. The boys decided they would take some of the moss from the ancient granite on which the church was built and replant it on great-grandma's grave. She would have been very pleased. Now I am the eldest in the family. It does give one pause to think that chronologically you are the next in line to die. I can see that ominous space waiting to be filled in, 1946-20 something something. However, I take great comfort in my faith and the enduring love of my wife and our growing family. 4 sons and partners, 10 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. There's nothing like holding a new baby to reassure you that life and love will go on. They say your bones carry the imprint of the soil in which you were born and raised. And so I am also comforted in knowing the dust of my bones will return to my natal soil and eventually join with my ancestors in the village cemetery. I imagine our family gathering on this familiar ground on a warm summer afternoon. The children will play on the soft grass their papa once tended. Perhaps they'll take a side trip to wonder at Bridal Veil Falls. And their parents will kneel beside the weathered stones to tidy the graves and share sweet remembrances of those sleepers in the quiet earth.
The final author we'll hear from today for our video launch is Isla Patterson. She is originally a fiction writer who turned her pen to nonfiction to write some of her own true-to-life stories. Isla grew up in remote mining towns, and she has an abiding love of wild places and stories that draw people together. And she says she's deeply grateful for the magic that is writing. Here is Isla Patterson reading Born Free-ish.
As a child, I read about, dreamed about, ran about as a horse. I had a high step, a proud curve to my neck, a long and flowing mane and tail. I was wild, fierce, and free. I learned to tell adults that I wanted to ride a horse, but what I really wanted was to race across meadows and mountains as one with them. As I got older, 9 or 10, I sometimes thrashed my way up through bad dreams where I reared and kicked, my screams echoing off the canyon walls, while more and more ropes bit deeply into the hide of my neck and pulled violently on my forelegs, crashing me to the ground, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. I sat wide-eyed in stunned disbelief the day my mom, her eyes misty with excitement, handed me a filled-in form. Give this to your teacher tomorrow. You can try out with the rest of the girls to be the Copper Queen or one of her princesses this year. She might as well have said, "Sorry, dear, we have to eat the family dog for dinner," or "Pack your bags, you're off on a wee trip into deep space with Valentina Tereshkova." I pretended to read my book before bed that night, but it was impossible to flee over the dunes with the herd. My heart was racketing around in my chest. I was winded and trembling. The form sat on my dresser, a dreadful reminder of the humiliations to come. My teacher's derisive snort, reeking of cigarette smoke and something awful, sickly and sweet, hit me in the face when I handed him the form. He and I both knew this was my mother's innocent delusion about my suitability for the job. Everyone but my mom, it seemed, knew the rigid hierarchy of the true royals in our school. Eventually, I joined a lineup of girls, each of us holding a number card in front of her chest, like criminals in a mugshot. We were paraded in front of the classrooms. I stood staring fixedly out of the window, while lucky kids sat in their desks copying down the numbers of their choice. After lunch, amidst an expectant ruffling of feathers, the teacher gave the girl in the row by the window his nice smile and handed her a card saying, "And in first place, by a very, very large margin, is our new copper queen." We all clapped cheerfully. She was the tall, lovely, obvious choice. He scowled at me, then tossed the next card on my desk and growled, "Good luck." My face flamed, acrid bile rose in my throat. Sound distorted, receded and boomed, as I stared at the neat black printing on the card, "Princess." Over the weeks leading up to the May Day festivities, the big event for the year's reigning royalty, little kids kept coming up to me in the schoolyard, explaining seriously that they had voted for me because I pushed them on the swing or had helped them tie their shoes. They failed to notice the bitterness as I dutifully replied, "Thanks so much." They hopped off to play, excited by the power of their ballot. At home, my mother was afire with creative energy, finishing seams, turning hems, sewing on buttons, all the while giving rapid-fire instructions: "Stand up straight, don't fidget, smile," as though she was only just now recognizing the full extent of my ignorance. I wondered how she knew all this princess stuff, and I wished I could giggle and be excited with her. She was working so hard. I found myself rereading Black Beauty, being reminded that there was dignity in taking up the yoke of duty. I would wear the prickly cinched-in clothes, the stiff, uncomfortable shoes, not nearly as torturous as a neckrein that drove poor Ginger mad. I would hold my head up high and let the bystanders enjoy the spectacle. The raw wooden upraised platform was a fascinating vantage point from which to watch the colorful furling and unfurling of the maypole, and the ocean beckoned from a new and wondrous perspective across the highway. A few weeks later, my mom proudly showed me the royal photograph taken during the parade. I took a good, long, parting look at the princess, sitting up on top of the back seat of a convertible, enveloped in her scratchy dress, bony face and buck teeth, in a stoic half smile under sticky out hair. I wondered which one she looked more like, a camel or Prince Charles, and with a loud whoop of laughter, I evaporated out the door. By the time I reached the lane, I was galloping, kicking up my heels, whinnying for joy, doing what I was born to do. Clumps of dirt flew up from beneath thundering hoofs as I raced across the land.
I really hope you enjoyed hearing 7 of the 26 stories from the Treasures ebook anthology, firsthand from the authors. The treasures in this book would have remained hidden, buried, if not for the resources and support of the Powell River Public Library. Many thanks and sincere appreciation to the library's board of directors, Chief Librarian Rebecca Burbank, Assistant Chief Librarian Natalie Porter, and all the amazing staff and volunteers, including the Friends of the Library. Thanks also to Pieta Woolley of Powell River Living magazine, who always supports and promotes our many memoir writers and publications. Many sincere thanks to all of the authors for participating, and especially to Wendy Barker, who is an author in the book, but also my indispensable volunteer proofreader. Lastly, this project would not have been possible without a dedicated and valuable library community and all that each person contributes, including you, the reader and viewer. So thank you very much for watching our Treasures Anthology video launch.